Commodore's keeping up with you.
Follow her trackless journey each week on Star Trek.
5 million characters magnetically recorded on 50 discs.
Being a nerd wasn't only about gadgets and screens, it was more about books, science kits, and the foundation of technology. In 1960, being a nerd was not the trend. If you were into science fiction, math, comics, or electronics, people did not think you were cool. Let's have a look at things only nerds will remember about the 1960s. Ruby laser. Most people would associate the word laser with things like CD players, scanners, and medical equipment, and even some alien action movies. Nothing, however, could be further from the truth. Everyone has seen something from the early gun assembly drawings in the 60s, and so the demonstration of the first operating laser was not a breakthrough, it was more like a gadget. You could carry Lady Penelope's pod in your pocket. Who can imagine how fanned out those who love technology felt? The thought of transferring information with the use of light from a laser sculpting and engraving was pure sorcery back then. The Ruby laser was the dawn into a new world where technology was going to be applied in communication, surgery, manufacturing, and many other fields. Optics and engineering nerds would have been hooked on this amazing advanced technology. Unix operating system. How could you forget Unix? These days, quite a few tech geeks are aware of what Unix is. Known as the inventors of Unix, Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie worked at Bell Labs. It became the basis for the majority of modern-day systems. I'm talking about a time when computing devices were analog and those massive machines took up entire rooms. Even the command center of an operating system was robust and intolerable. It made operating systems much easier. For starters, it allowed several people to use a computer simultaneously, which was revolutionary for the time. If you could ever get your hands on a machine that operated Unix, you were presented with a glimpse of the coming age. Nimrod computer. Despite the fact that this computer predates the 60s, it's one of the early technological wonders that captivated enthusiasts within that decade. Nimrod was not a regular computer. It was created to play a certain game called Nim, a computer that was capable of playing games. We all laugh at that considering the variety of games today, but it was a breakthrough back then. Not only was it a novelty, it was one of the earliest attempts at what we refer to now as artificial intelligence. It's true that modern-day AI has improved tremendously. It wasn't long ago there were machines like Nimrod, which, while simplistic, exhibited capabilities beyond the simple calculations of a computer. It created a vibrant landscape full of interesting ideas in the minds of those who wished that CPUs could be trained, modified, and played with. In many respects, it was the precursor of AI-focused developments that came later. Nimrod was a pivotal development in the building of electrical circuits and writing code.
Into worlds beyond your dreams. Star Trek, every week, in color on the NBC television network.
Star Trek. If you were a nerd in the 1960s, there was one television show that stood out above the rest. Star Trek had its first run beginning in 1966, and it was more than a science fiction television show. It was a utopian dream that everybody cherished. The show featured Captain James T. Kirk, Mr. Spock, and the crew of the Starship Enterprise traveling all throughout space. They explored new worlds, met all kinds of alien species, and it portrayed a time in the history of mankind where everybody came together as one. There were no differences in race, country, or even planet. For the first time, we were shown a great goal that included aliens and humans. If you had a Star Trek poster on your wall, or loved arguing for hours about whether Kirk or Spock was better, you were a nerd for sure. The PDP-8 minicomputer. This computer was designed in 1965 by Digital Equipment Corporation as a pioneer of the minicomputer. And it's interesting how anything today that's smaller than a laptop or a smartphone is way more powerful than the computers of back then. However, in the middle of the 60s, being able to use a machine like this one was a radical improvement in technology. Before the PDP-8, computing machines were heavy and bulky and mostly used by institutions such as universities and state labs. They were nowhere near the buying capacity or physical space of an average nerd. They were fairly cheap, significantly compact compared to earlier models, and distributed computing to an entirely new segment of the populace. For people with a taste for technology in the 60s, it was a reality far from any conceivable imagination. You could own a computer, and it wouldn't take up the whole room or break the bank. Microchips. Innovations in the 1960s would be incomplete without one of the most significant, the microchip. People of that generation understood that everything was about to change. Prior to that, computers had to be built using transistors, resistors, capacitors, and all kinds of electrical circuitry that then had to be connected. Thanks to the microchip, they became compact and more efficient, and in addition, speed was an added advantage. It was the beginning of the computer era. From simple calculators to complex systems of satellites, everything became possible because of these little lines of circuits. The Apollo missions to the moon? Well, you bet. If microchips weren't invented, they would have never been possible. Basic code. Now we'll focus on another important invention in the field of computer programming, BASIC, the language that made it easier for everyday nerds to have a computer. BASIC was developed at Dartmouth College in 1964 for one singular purpose. They hoped to allow more people to work with computers without being expected to be capable of complex mathematics or trust electrical engineers. With previous languages, programming was rather advanced. BASIC altered all of that by making it available at a high level and making interactive programming language suitable for all users.
Hey, it's the Batmobile! Just look!
The Batman TV series. The 1960s didn't only provide an array of gadgets, it had something else to take pleasure from: television shows. One of the most popular was the Batman television series. It was goofy and bright and had a lot of humor. Of course, it's not the serious kind of superhero content that people love today, but the show played a significant role in bringing comic books to a wider audience. And for many, it may have been their first exposure to comic book characters on the screen. It was a show that almost everyone could enjoy, from families to friends, and may have been responsible for growing out a lot of comic book fans. The Apollo Guidance Computer. No account of the 1960s nerd world was complete without mentioning the Apollo Guidance Computer. It was a piece of technology that was out of this world. Made for use in the Apollo program, it was most importantly used in missions that were aiming to land on the moon, such as Apollo Flight 11 in 1969. For tech nerds, it was the absolute epitome of what computing could do back then. It didn't only get us to the moon, it opened up possibilities of computing to nerds in far-flung corners of the world. The first computer mouse. Here's a device that we all have in the modern world, the computer mouse, but try to imagine operating a computer without one. In the early 1960s, that's what many people had to do. But in 1964, ingenuity led to the conceptualization of the first computer mouse, which consisted of a wooden block with two wheels wandering about to allow cursor movement. For fans, it was a demonstration that was impressive. The fact that you could point, click, and interact with things on the screen brought completely different relationships with the machine. The mouse may have appeared as a rudimentary object, but it was a revolutionary device that paved a path for the intuitive screens we use today. Arthur C. Clarke's sci-fi classics. We might as well take a quick excursion into science fiction, a genre that provided infinitely vivid ideas to nerds of the 1960s. One of the leading names of the genre was Arthur C. Clarke. Not only did he write the most fascinating stories, he influenced the perception of space technology and expectations of the future. Some of his works include 2001: A Space Oddity and Childhood's End. They were obligatory readings for sci-fi obsessed nerds, and not only did they provide fun, they challenged nerds on how they would see the future in the way of space exploration, artificial intelligence, and the race the world would fit in. For any fan of science fiction as well as science itself, Clarke's genre remapped a way of thinking about the new frontier. The IBM 1311. Because of the advancement in the electronic era of the 1960s, many people found the idea of storing so much data in a single piece of equipment unrealistic. This brought in the IBM 1311 disk drive in 1962. It was the first removable hard disk drive, and up until that time, computers stored information on reels of magnetic tape or punch cards. Means of storage data were time-consuming and cumbersome. Each of the 1311's removable disks could hold about 2 million characters, which may seem quite small by today's standards, but was an enormous step forward at the time. To tech geeks, the very notion of swappable disks, the likes of which we took for granted in USB drives today, was revolutionary. It allowed companies, researchers, and individuals to utilize storage while broadening the accessibility of information. Though in the main focus they were used in business settings, for anyone involved with computers in the 60s, the 1311 was a glimpse into the future. The origins of Arpanet. By the 1960s, scientists were being sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense to develop a network that would effectively be the precursor of the Internet. Arpanet was to come into use in 1969, but the vision and formative principles had been thought of much earlier, and it was one of the most captivating undertakings that had the dual envelopment of technology and mass communication. For those who consider themselves technological nerds, the concept of connecting multiple computers capable of geographical data transfer and simultaneous interaction could be defined as radical. It's worth mentioning that back then, computers were standalone machines. You could use a computer to manipulate data, but to disseminate it was cumbersome, usually by manually transporting the storage device. In 1966, the Arpanet envisioned a network that would interconnect research facilities, enabling interaction amongst scientists and engineers. At its outset, it was perceived as a military project, but as soon as its educational and scientific functionalities became clear, the project changed forever. Marvel's The Avengers. How could one not enjoy Marvel's The Avengers, which debuted in 1963? Stan Lee and Jack Kirby made Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Ant-Man, and the Wasp into one group, and it was simply amazing. Of course, Captain America would come later, and just like that, fans saw what was called a superhero team. Each of the heroes was an individual, and they came together to fight off crime and evil. The Avengers let everyone know that superheroes could have a plot with depth of many people, powers, and backgrounds, and it was enough for nerds of the 60s. It set the foundation of both film franchises and crossovers of today that are popular in pop culture. LEDs. Moving on to something more contemporary, we have LEDs. They began to take root in the 1960s. One of the small devices introduced in the decade would have unending consequences for the development of the technology. In 1962, they were created and may have appeared nothing more than a small lamp that emitted a reddish light, but they were a significant step forward in technology. LEDs would later find application in various products, from video game remote controls to digital clocks and lamps. People who loved and appreciated electronic gadgets, it was a turning point. They consumed less power and were more sturdy, and over the years, they were produced in different colors of light. The Apollo Lunar Module. Every space geek who's ever seen the moon landing would agree that the Apollo Lunar Module was one of the most bewildering technologies that ever existed. This was a spacecraft that landed people on the moon in the course of the Apollo missions. This was a spaceship that actually touched down on the moon. It featured two main parts: the descent stage, which landed astronauts on the moon, and the ascent stage that took them off the moon and back to the spacecraft above. And the design of the lunar module was unseen at the time. Transistor radios. While space travel had captured the imagination of tech nerds, there was also a revolution taking place closer to home with transistor radios. Although transistor technology had been developed in the 1950s, by the 60s they had become cheap, portable, and available to everyone, making news and music accessible for people's pockets. A tech nerd in the 60s thought of a transistor radio as the first mobile technology ever invented. Portable battery-operated radios were compact enough to fit in your handbag and were the first devices that most people came in contact with that made it possible to keep touch with the rest of the world like never before. You could listen to the Beatles or check out the latest bulletins from your pocket, and it was quite the breakthrough. Magnetic core memory. Focusing on the more technical aspect of the 60s, one of the dominant technologies in the provision of computers during that time was magnetic core memory. Long before there were RM chips that we have today, magnetic core memory was the memory of choice in computers, and quite a revolutionary technology for the industry. Such memory was present in the earliest of mainframes, which included those manufactured by IBM. Magnetic core memory worked by placing a memory bit in an array of small circular magnetic rings or cores, which contained one bit of information, either a 1 or a 0. It's by using these coils and running current around them that the data was stored and retrieved. Being a sturdy and dependable type of memory, it was suitable for times large-scale computers that performed heavy computations more often than not for commercial or state use. Another system that the core memory was found was the Apollo guidance computer. For nerds who enjoyed building such computers, it was an era that birthed core memory and layouts. The evolution of Kaiju cinema. For movie buffs in the 60s, there was no other thing more fascinating than Godzilla. Although the first Godzilla film was released in Japan in 1954, it was still in the early 60s that monster B movies became popular, and Godzilla became a household name. For fans of science fiction and giant bread films in particular, they were sheer exhilarating entertainment. What made Godzilla and Kaiju films so nerd-tastic was the fantastic exaggerated monsters in combination with special effects that were cheap by today's scope, voice-changing technology, and computerized images, which were revolutionary back then. For scenarios, the action was filmed on small-scale models and actors were dressed in monster costumes. The movies depicted fist-fight ferocious clashes of organisms with the ability to level a skyscraper. Movies like Godzilla vs. Gojira and Destroy All Monsters were obsessive hits with sci-fi genre for their outlandish action, implausible monster design, and ridiculous but cute visuals. The IBM 360. For the technology amateur of the 60s, to say that the IBM 360 came as a revelation would be an understatement. In 1964, it was a family of computers that revolutionized the world by providing one novel organizing principle: system compatibility across families and applications. Before the 360, computers were one-on-one systems designed for a particular application, and so people had to acquire different machines for every unique thing they wanted to do. The 360 introduced the idea of family computers in which every model, from the tiniest to the most powerful, could run the same software, utilizing the same hardware peripherals. For the first time, companies could start with low-end and less expensive models, and there was no need to entirely rewrite the code or purchase a brand new piece of equipment. The concept of upgrade and compatibility made the 360 powerful and seemingly unbeatable for the time. Which of these things have you experienced when they were first released? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like this video, you'll want to see this one about the most dangerous old toys that are now banned. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.